She's into my life. Do you believe that?
I'll teach you to laugh at me.
Sucks to suck.
I don't typically talk about a game's history on this channel for a couple of reasons. One, a game's history rarely impacts its analysis, and two, I f***ing hate doing research. But I don't mind starting with a very quick history lesson this episode because, quite frankly, I'm a weeb and loved Record of Lodoss War as a kid. I know originally, Record of Lodoss War was a tabletop RPG directly influenced by Dungeons & Dragons, and that it gained popularity in the mid to late 80s as a replay series in a Japanese magazine. Replays are transcriptions of RPG sessions, kinda like Harmon Quest if anyone remembers that, but only written up instead of recorded and animated. It wasn't until 1990 that Record of Lodoss War got animated with its own anime, which then paved the way for its own manga. At the expense of sounding like a Wikipedia page, that's the extent of what I wanted to say about the game's legacy. Record of Lodoss War, Deedlit, and Wonder Labyrinth is a licensed game about an anime/manga that started in the 80s that consistently released content through 2019, with Wonder Labyrinth releasing in 2020. It goes without saying that this nearly 40-year-old franchise has a lot of history and lore. Unfortunately, Wonder Labyrinth doesn't want to share any of it with you. If you're familiar with Record of Lodoss War, you'll be having nerdgasms the entire game with all the throwbacks and member berries. However, if you're unfamiliar with the franchise, you're going to be confused. The game just kind of starts with zero introductions to the world or its main character Deedlit, and it really never explicitly explains anything until the end. This confusion the game steeps players in is entirely intentional, but I'll talk about the narrative more in depth later in the video. Right now, I want to address the elephant in the room.
Today I'm talking about a Metroidvania that people just can't stop comparing to Symphony of the Night.
But it's definitely inspired by a certain game. Obviously, that being Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
Borrowing from Symphony of the Night is nothing new in the world of video games.
This incredible action exploration title may take inspiration from both Metroid and Symphony of the Night.
Comparing it to Symphony of the Night would also be apt.
I guarantee if you've heard anything about Wonder Labyrinth, it's its comparison to Symphony of the Night. So I guess it's finally my turn to weigh in like so many others. Is Wonder Labyrinth a true spiritual successor to Symphony of the Night? Superficially, yeah, but the similarities are only skin deep. The art style, the animation, the after images Deedlit leaves behind as she moves, very Symphony of the Night. Though Wonder Labyrinth's presentation is a significant step up, but what'd you expect with over 2 decades between the games? Just like Alucard, Deedlit also has a multitude of weapons at her disposal, albeit with a much better UI. Again, 20 years separation, people. I'd hope Wonder Labyrinth's devs could improve on something. But don't go into Wonder Labyrinth thinking it's the next Symphony, because you're going to be gravely disappointed. When comparing other aspects that make a Metroidvania, like world structure and exploration, Wonder Labyrinth doesn't hit Symphony's highs. That's not to say that Wonder Labyrinth isn't good. I've beaten it 3 times now and have a blast every time I play it. Plus, this isn't a comparison video. I only wanted to clear the air just in case you thought Wonder Labyrinth was the second coming of Symphony. It's not. In fact, in the very first video I ever published on YouTube, I had this to say about Wonder Labyrinth. Man, I don't know what it is about Wonder Labyrinth. It looks and plays so well that people say it looks and feels like a spiritual sequel to Symphony of the Night. So what stops it from achieving greatness? Well, it's finally time I analyzed this game to answer that question. And hopefully, along the way, we'll discover if Wonder Labyrinth might be worth your time. As always, we begin our journey by discussing
combat.
I'll be real with you. I didn't say it in the intro, but if you've played Symphony of the Night, then you know exactly how combat feels in Wonder Labyrinth. From her attacks, to her floaty jumps, to her backdash, Symphony players are going to feel right at home with Deedlit. The main difference between Symphony and Wonder Labyrinth's combat is that Wonder Labyrinth's hits, for lack of a better term, feel chunky, meaty, more impactful. It really comes down to the sound design and how enemies react. A successful hit makes the enemy shake and comes with a satisfying slashing sound, and defeated enemies typically burst into flames, which is always awesome. As mentioned in the intro, Deedlit has a plethora of weapons she can find and equip. Each weapon having an attack and agility stat, with agility referring to how quickly she attacks with it. There are many types of weapons, and each type has its own animation. My favorite was anything that swung overhead, like great swords and axes. They're typically slow and powerful, and their swing arcs were perfect for pretty much any situation. Lots of cheese going on, and I like it. As an elf, it's only natural that Deedlit also uses a bow. Arrows are surprisingly effective and do massive amounts of damage at very little expense. Each shot costs 3 MP, and Deedlit's mana regenerates slowly on its own. She can aim arrows at 45 degrees above and below her waist, but she can't shoot straight up, which is odd. But what she can do is some wicked trick shots off metallic surfaces. Trick shots are mostly used for puzzles, but when you pull one off on an enemy, man does it feel great. Normally, I wouldn't give a bow the light of day because I'm just a dumb caveman who likes bonk. But because the bow has its own dedicated button that allows for me to both shoot and bonk without an awkward equipment exchange, I tended to actually use the bow a lot. As you might suspect, MP isn't only used for arrows. Deedlit's attuned with nature and thus can summon elementals to her aid, such as tiny wisps or shades who home in on enemies, or the Jenny Freet to burn this mother down. Each elemental spell has its own, wait for it, elemental attribute. And each enemy comes with elemental weaknesses and resistances. Enemy affinities are displayed by dice that appear once you hit an enemy. The game never outright explains this mechanic. Blue dice means the enemy's weak to the element indicated by the symbol atop the die, and red, the enemy's resistance. For example, a red 6 with a flame on it means the enemy's completely invulnerable to fire. But a red 1 would mean they only have slight fire resistance. Same with blue. Blue 1 equals a little hurt, blue 6 means a big hurt. I honestly never paid too much attention to the dice during any of my playthroughs. If you can't hurt something, the game will tell you by showing guard instead of a number. And whenever that happened, I just swapped spirits. And now we've come to Wonder Labyrinth's main gimmick, spirit swapping. Much like the shoot 'em up Ikaruga, Deedlit comes with 2 polarities she can swap on the fly, wind and fire. While equipped with an element, Deedlit's weapon takes on that element's attribute, and she becomes immune to that element. For example, if she has the wind element equipped, she does wind damage with her weapons and can walk through these wind walls and get hit by wind magic without getting hurt. Not only does she come out unscathed, but hitting her with the matching element recharges her MP. And if the spirit level of any equipped weapon is maxed at level 3, Deedlit's HP innately recharges at a ridiculous rate. So what are spirit levels? Both the wind and flame spirit can level up as you attack, but it's a little weird. Think of it kind of like Quote from Cave Story. Quote's weapons level up as he collects those golden Doritos enemies drop upon being attacked, and his weapon level and damage decreases when he takes a hit. Deedlit's spirit levels are the exact same thing, except she doesn't need to collect anything. Her spirit meter just increases as she attacks. But here's the weird part. If you want to increase your wind spirit, you have to attack with the fire spirit equipped, and vice versa. It sounds stupid at first, but it works out great for the player. Let's say I have both wind and fire spirits at level 3. If I have wind equipped and take a hit, it decreases wind to level 2, and I get weaker. Naturally, I swap over to level 3 fire to increase my weapon damage, start regaining the health I lost, and recharge my wind meter with each attack. Soon, wind will reach level 3 again, and if I take damage while equipped with fire, I can just switch to wind and repeat the process. It's a brilliant system implemented very well, and it shines brightest during boss encounters. There are a ton of bosses in Wonder Labyrinth, and while none are particularly challenging, they all look rad as hell and are fun to trash. Many are huge and use their arena to great effect, like how Abram jumps from pool to pool or how Shooting Star moves to the background before launching a volley of bullshit. But the real fun comes from how these encounters force players to utilize the spirit swapping system. Switching spirits on the fly to nullify damage and to maximize healing potential makes for great exchanges against otherwise uninteresting boss patterns. That's not to say the bosses are bad, they just lean a tad too far on the easy side. Regardless, each fight's a spectacle and full of nostalgic surprises for people familiar with the franchise. Alright, a quick summary for combat. Deedlit moves and attacks like Alucard, and that's not a bad thing. Attacks feel chunky, and there's a lot of weapons for you to play with, including surprisingly powerful bows. Deedlit has a few elemental magic spells up her sleeves to help with her already great ranged game, and elemental affinities play a big role in combat. That was a pun. I said roll like roll because of the dice, but I don't think it comes across very well verbally. Deedlit's spirit swapping gimmick's fun and easy to use once you get the hang of it, and the boss encounters do a good job at utilizing the system, even if they're not the most difficult.
Abilities.
Deedlit's traversal abilities are sparse and mostly unexciting. She gets a slide, underwater breathing, a double jump, and then a higher double jump that also does damage. The most interesting ability she gains is hovering, which she can only do if she has the wind spirit equipped. It's also cool looking and leads to a couple of brief yet interesting sections, but it's only needed maybe 2 or 3 times to progress through the game. As far as progression gating, Deedlit mostly gets blocked by colored doors that require finding switches to step on. There are seriously only a handful of times you need the double jump to progress, and maybe 1 time you need the slide. And that time is right when you get it, though it does require some backtracking. But we'll talk about backtracking, or lack thereof, in the exploration section. Overall, traversal abilities are weak and underutilized, both in frequency of necessity and in utility. I just feel like, considering there are only a few, these abilities could have at least had multiple uses to keep them interesting. Be honest, how many of you who've actually played this game even remember that Deedlit could slide? Probably not a lot of you.
Progression.
Progression in Wonder Labyrinth is just as bare bones as its abilities. Deedlit levels up like a traditional Metroidvania, by stabbing things until they explode. Once she explodes enough things, her level increases. But what that means, I couldn't tell you. I mean, I could, it just doesn't make sense to me. Her attack and defense increase, and that's it. All these other stats on the map screen, they increase when you find in-game items. HP potions, MP potions, fire spirit and wind spirit power increases. Fun stuff to find for sure, but it makes leveling feel kinda lame. Especially because I never felt my defense went up. No matter where I was, I could get bodied in just a few hits if I wasn't careful. And there are no armor or accessories in the game, so you're stuck as a glass cannon. By which I mean, boy, does Deedlit hit hard. And I don't even understand it. My attack stat says 12, and my weapon attack can be like 50, and when I hit something, I do 200 to 400 damage. It's crazy the amount of damage Deedlit can dish out. And that's actually it for progression. You level up through EXP, but leveling's not substantial. Or at least it never felt substantial. Because you increase most stats through item gets. Damage scaling never made sense, but it wasn't that big a deal because I was always hitting hard. And that's one of the major issues I have with this game. It's kinda easy. I'd walk into a corridor filled with gnomes and griffins or some shit, be impressed by how cool these new enemies look, and then proceed to immediately explode them without seeing what they can do. Most enemies in this game are straight pushovers. It was super disappointing, until you get to the final biome. Then the enemies finally get some teeth, let me tell you. But that's like the last hour of the game, so your appreciation for worthy opponents is short-lived. A little more balancing in enemy difficulty would have made Deedlit's overall character progression feel much more impactful and noticeable, as well as making the game more fun. With the late game drastically ramping up in difficulty, it feels more like the devs were like, oh shit, we should probably program these things to fight back. I think another disappointment I had was the lack of gear. Oh, there's plenty of weapons, but no armor or accessories. Shops litter the labyrinth where you can buy more weapons and consumable items like potions. But quite frankly, I found shops pointless. Anytime I found one, I either had a weapon from an enemy drop that was far superior to anything the dwarf was selling, or I never had enough money to buy any weapons better than the one I was currently using. Money was only obtained from killing enemies, but you never see the currency. No gems or coins or money bags fly out of enemies once you dispatch them. Only fire. And without actually seeing the currency, I just never paid attention to it. Which worked out because I never bought anything. I ended Wonder Labyrinth as a 1000-air, which means absolutely nothing if you've completed the game. But we'll talk about that soon enough.
Exploration.
Wonder Labyrinth has the densest map I've ever seen in a Metroidvania. I don't want to show the full map for spoiler's sake, but trust me when I say it is compact. Most MV maps use quote-unquote white space to establish a sense of distance or relativity, but Wonder Labyrinth is like, f that, we're cramming everything together. I understand why the map looks like this, as it is a labyrinth, but it takes a lot away from the game's mystery. Anytime I saw a black space surrounded by colored spaces, I knew that space was a hidden room. Some might see that as a positive, some might see that as a negative. I mostly saw it as being silly. So, what's there to explore? That's a good question, because I don't know. With zero setup and no world building, it's tough to give a shit about any of this. All you know is Deedlit woke up in here and doesn't remember how she arrived. The major problem with that? Who the f*** is Deedlit? Obviously, I know who she is, and so do plenty of other weebs raised in the 80s and 90s, but I'd wager there are plenty of people who played this and was like, huh? But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll save all that for the narrative section. What I'm saying now is there's a real disconnect between the player and the in-game world because it feels so generic and jarring. And this greatly impacts your motivation to explore. I suppose the mystery as to why Deedlit's here might entice players, but without knowing who Deedlit is, it's tough to care. And let's be real, you'll probably figure out the game's twist long before it happens. Okay, back to exploration. There's not much to explore. There are lots of rooms to traverse and things to find, but the game's so incredibly linear, you could easily convince someone into thinking Wonder Labyrinth's a short, 6-level platformer instead of a Metroidvania. Backtracking is nearly non-existent. There are like 5 or 6 times when you can return to a previous biome to pick up something, but it's never anything serious. Just spirit power increases or weapons that are always worse than your current weapon. Thankfully, Wonder Labyrinth has a great fast travel system. And by great, I mean plentiful. You seriously find a new fast travel point every 10 or 15 rooms. I might be a little hyperbolic when I say that, but I might not be because there are so many freaking travel points. Like I said, this game is dense. Fast travel points, save points, boss rooms, switch rooms, puzzle rooms, items. You'll never travel too far before running into one of these things. And in between these things are claustrophobic hallways and caverns filled with enemies. I don't know, the biomes themselves are pretty diverse, but there's just something about Wonder Labyrinth's rooms. They're so sterile and predictable. There's never much to look forward to. Most rooms look samey in any given biome, and I felt enemy placement was too cramped most of the time. Just a little breathing room in the level design would do this game some good, especially because Deedlit has that sweet hover. That hover could have been really fun to use if the level design were more interesting. I guess that's it for exploration. Wonder Labyrinth has a dense map that leaves little to the imagination. And without proper narrative setup with the location and our protagonist, it's tough to truly get invested in exploration. There is lots to find though, with plenty of hidden rooms telegraphed by suspicious cracks in the walls. So staying vigilant pays off. Backtracking exists, but barely and never for story progression. And rewards for backtracking were rarely exciting. But the most disappointing thing about Wonder Labyrinth's exploration was its level design, both dull and cramped. Once you've seen one room in a biome, you've pretty much seen them all. Wonder Labyrinth tries to mix things up with quote-unquote arrow puzzles, but they were more like obstructions than brain teasers. Half of them could be solved simply by ignoring them and just taking the damage. Overall, exploration is easily Wonder Labyrinth's weakest aspect, and that's not great for a Metroidvania.
Atmosphere.
I touched a little on the atmosphere already with the samey hallways and whatnot, and most of it was negative, but I actually like what this game is doing. It's something I'll delve into in the spoilers section, but everything I don't like or appreciate about Wonder Labyrinth, I believe was done intentionally for thematic purposes, and you gotta respect that. So what can I say about the atmosphere that's non-spoilery? Well, Wonder Labyrinth feels like an arcade game from the 90s. Everything is bright, sprites are huge with excellent animations, and so many of the sound effects sound like something I'd hear in those hallowed, neon carpet adorned halls, such as the non-diegetic voice that booms, or the dazed sound. Heck, a joystick appears on screen to show you how to use the fast travel system. It all takes me back, boys. Enemy designs are largely generic, but they all look good or great and are appropriate for the fantasy setting. And what enemies lack in originality, they more than make up for in sheer numbers. The enemy variety in this game is nuts. Every biome has half a dozen or more unique enemies, and aside from summoned enemies like wolves, I believe there isn't a reskin in the entire batch. For such a short game lasting 4 to 6 hours, the devs really went all out in the enemy department. The music, on the other hand, wasn't given as much attention. Most tracks sounded like discount store Castlevania. Not bad, but not great. Decent and unoffensive. How's that for a tagline to put on your game's box? That's all I want to say about the atmosphere for now. Though the biomes and environments do little to excite, I always enjoy my time in Wonder Labyrinth. It's bright, takes me back to my old arcade days with its crisp visuals and bombastic sound effects, and I love all the enemies. And I think younger gamers will still find the experience charming.
Narrative.
Wonder Labyrinth tells the story of Deedlit trying to escape a mysterious labyrinth that she's found herself in. She doesn't know how she got there, and she doesn't know why her friends are acting so strangely. It won't take players long to feel like something's not right about the labyrinth, and the game does a lot of foreshadowing with character dialogue and cliche visual effects to guide players to the truth. What sells this not right feeling or strangeness is the character dialogue. As you progress and meet up with friends and foes, you'll feel uneasy or lost as characters subtly, or not so subtly, try to tell Deedlit something or respond in weird ways that Deedlit just kinda shrugs off. It's eerie and interesting despite being a little predictable. But in the end, it's a pretty touching tale, especially if you're a fan of the franchise. Overall, the narrative's fine for the short amount of time you'll be in the labyrinth, even if the revelation is played a little heavy-handed. Alright boys, it's spoiler time. go to this timestamp to skip to my final thoughts. And spoilers in 3, 2, 1.
Spoilers.
You've probably already guessed just from my talking about it, but something's off about this labyrinth. Turns out it's an illusion crafted by a demon named Nile. This demon feeds on grief and despair and has latched onto Deedlit, trapping her in an illusionary labyrinth deep within the recesses of her mind. But why Deedlit? Why would she be so sad? You see, Deedlit was a member of an adventurous party that traveled across Lodoss Island. Despite her elven heritage and haughtiness, she developed deep bonds with her party, one member of which she fell in love with, Parn the Knight. Deedlit and Parn lived their lives together in peace and happiness, until it was Parn's time to go. Unlike her friends, Deedlit was a high elf blessed with eternal life, and thus she could do nothing but watch as her dearest friends, one by one, passed into the great beyond, including her lover Parn. Grief-stricken and lost, Deedlit fell into despair, and that's when Nile found his opportunity. It's a sad tale about the consequences of refusing to let go of the past in order to move on, and I found it quite relatable. Earlier, I had mentioned the map's denseness and the biome's cramped and claustrophobic sameness and how these design choices were intentional. It's my belief that the game's designed this way to reinforce Deedlit's mindset. She feels trapped, depressed, hopeless, like the walls are closing in and there's no escape. Remember, the labyrinth is a reflection of her mind, so this map design makes sense. It doesn't mean I like it, but I can appreciate what the devs were doing thematically. Or I could be full of shit and chalk it all up to that just being how labyrinths are built. Who knows? The last spoiler I want to talk about is this part. It's the dream sequence right after Ashram resurrects. It's just the worst. It's only 4 screens long and takes about 10 seconds to get to the end, but man, is it such a piece of shit. All you gotta do is walk from right to left, but these damn skeleton dudes block your path and kill you in like 3 hits. For this section, the game takes away all your abilities, so you have no mobility options beyond walking and jumping, and you can't really hurt the skeletons. Oh, and these skeletons, they fly, so jumping over them is typically out of the question. Your only course of action is to hope they float high enough for you to walk under, or else you're stuck and have to rely on knockback cheese to get through. And you can only use that twice before you're dead. The stars have to align just right for you to get past all 3 skellies in this scene. And if even one doesn't move out of the way, you're screwed. If you can't walk under them, you'll have to wait. Then more skellies will appear from behind and shoot lightning at you. Because of course they shoot lightning at you. This part is so frustrating because there's nothing you can do. You just have to pray these assholes float high enough for you to get by. Every time I play this part, I die like 10 times, turning a section that should take only 10 seconds into a section that takes 10 minutes. It's so random and it's stupid.
Conclusion.
Record of Lodoss War, Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth is odd. It's obviously a great action game, but Metroidvania, it's mid at best. Honestly, Wonder Labyrinth feels like its Metroidvania-ness was tacked on late in the game's development cycle. Like it wasn't originally planned to be a Metroidvania, or the devs just wanted to do the bare minimum to make it one. Again, I like this game, but it just feels so lackluster in the MV department. Its map design is odd, the narrative, though mildly satisfying in the end, really isn't that great regardless if you're a franchise veteran or not. Exploration isn't very exciting or rewarding, and backtracking is practically non-existent, making the game feel incredibly linear and stage-based. In fact, there are many times the game even introduces sections as a stage. That being said, there's still so much to like. The sprite work, the animations, the arcadey feel, the enemy designs, and the combat. Combat is Wonder Labyrinth's main draw and is what keeps me coming back. It's simple, feels chunky. I don't really know what I'm trying to say when I say that, but I'm gonna keep saying it because I feel it in my heart of hearts. And is just a lot of fun. I love running around, stab exploding things, and shooting arrows all over the place. And I just really like the spirit swapping mechanic and how it was used to make the boss fights interesting and engaging. And that arcadey feel that permeates through everything the game does, that's something I wish more games replicated. Would I recommend Wonder Labyrinth? Yeah, I would, to both MV vets and noobs. It's short, clocking in at most 6 hours, so it's not a deep time commitment. And it's extremely action-oriented, meaning you won't even notice how fast time flies. You know, it's funny. I watched a lot of other people's reviews on Wonder Labyrinth and listened to each one compare it to Symphony of the Night. I also heard a majority of these same people criticize Wonder Labyrinth's length, saying it was much too short or needed to be twice as long. I find this funny because do you all recall how long Symphony of the Night is? I just did a playthrough last month, and it took me less than 5 hours to get through it. I'm not a speedrunner. I was playing it casually. I've just beaten that game 30-something times and know where everything is. But you won't hear a single person criticize Symphony for its 5-hour runtime. Yet you'll hear everyone say Deedlit's 6-hour runtime is too short. Why is that? I think for a few reasons. 1, Symphony is much older, so it's afforded much more grace. 2, there's tons of optional stuff to prolong its runtime. And 3, and this one's the most important, Symphony allows you to get lost. Wonder Labyrinth doesn't let you do that because exploration isn't its focus. Action is its focus. And because the game is so action-oriented, it feels much shorter than it actually is, though it is a short game. And because Symphony demands players to run around, backtrack, get lost, and just generally has a lot of downtime, i.e. non-combat time, it allows players to explore, become intimate with their surroundings, and appreciate the atmosphere. Wonder Labyrinth doesn't do this. It wants players to constantly be in a state of fight or flight, filling its cramped rooms with monsters to stab explode. So yeah, when you're constantly stab exploding, time tends to move a little more quickly than if you were running back through a series of comparatively empty rooms you've been through several times already just so you can grab a relic or something. And I think that answers my question I posed at the beginning of my YouTube tenure.
What stops it from achieving greatness?
Record of Lodoss War, Deedlit, and Wonder Labyrinth isn't a great Metroidvania because it's not memorable. I've played through this game 3 times now, and every time I popped it back in, I forgot everything about it. But why? Because it doesn't allow time for anything to marinate. Great Metroidvanias know how to balance downtime with action, letting players absorb environments or stay in a state of suspense or provide times of reflection while exploring. Wonder Labyrinth doesn't have these moments. It tosses exploration aside and instead focuses on creating an action-packed experience. And when you're in constant combat, you tend to rush through everything. And that's Wonder Labyrinth's greatest weakness as a Metroidvania. It puts exploration in the corner while combat takes center stage and dances the night away. That's a Dirty Dancing reference, by the way. Now let me reiterate. I love Wonder Labyrinth and think it's a fun game, but it's also a weak Metroidvania. 2 things can be true at the same time. And as I've already stated, I recommend this game to all MV enthusiasts. Despite it being a weak entry into the genre, it's still a short and fun action game. As long as you keep in mind, it most likely won't scratch that Metroidvania itch that only great exploration can. You'll have a good time. And that's more than I can say about most licensed games.